Welcome to the Daily Surrender, a space for real, raw, and vulnerable conversations about what it truly means to live in alignment with God's design. I'm Jennifer Ragazzo, a soul-aligned wellness coach who is far from perfect and still figuring out this whole human experience, just like you. Here we talk about the messy, the beautiful, and everything in between as we learn to let go, trust more, and step into the peace and freedom that's already waiting for us. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Daily Surrender. I am your host, Jennifer Ragazzo, and today we are diving into one of the most overlooked but absolutely critical pillars of wellness, and that's boundaries. I've talked about boundaries on some of our previous episodes, and it's absolutely one of the things that I see my clients struggle with the most. So if you're feeling tired all the time, you're resentful, you feel stretched too thin, or like you've lost yourself in caring for everyone else in your life, this conversation is for you. We often think of boundaries as something that's so rigid. Boundaries are like these walls that we put up, and we think that they're selfish. But what if boundaries are actually one of the most loving, sacred things that you can give yourself and others? Let's talk about it. So, there's a cost to living your life without boundaries. Let's get really honest here. When we're living without boundaries, we can struggle and suffer from things like chronic fatigue, burnout, anxiety, gut issues, hormone imbalances, and even autoimmune flares. Yes, from lack of boundaries. And when we start diving in and digging in, and I do this with my clients as I help them to super sleuth why these different symptoms are showing up for them. And as we're digging, we can trace so many of the origins of these symptoms of dis-ease and balance in their overall well-being back to the emotional and energetic misalignment of not having boundaries. So, living without boundaries, what does that even mean? Perhaps you're not even aware that you're living without them. So, lean in. If any of the things that I have spoke to so far on this podcast episode are things that you struggle with or you have struggled with. So, when you're living without boundaries, you're in a constant state of reacting. You're in reaction mode. You're not in a proactive place of living your life. You're basically just winging it. And what happens, happens. And then you end up having to react to it, which, as you can imagine, is an enormous energetic drain. That's a recipe for burnout. That's a recipe for inflammation and unrest in your whole self, a lack of joy, right? Your nervous system never feels safe when you don't have boundaries. And we're going to dive into more details of all of this on this episode. But the nervous system, it perceives the lack of boundaries as being very, very unsafe. So it keeps us in this hyper vigilant state where you're always in a simmering state of fight or flight or sympathetic dominance. I can attest to that. And I'm going to share a little bit about my own story living without boundaries or very, very leaky boundaries for a very long time that was perpetuating my body's state of dis-ease, regardless of all the other things that I was doing to try and keep myself healthy. But when you're living without boundaries, you become really disconnected from your own needs. You don't even know what your needs are because you're reacting all the time and you're oftentimes people pleasing other people. That's one of the biggest reasons we live without boundaries is because we think that it's our job to make everybody else happy and we walk around trying to morph ourselves into what we perceive other people want us to be or do, right? You start really resenting the people that you're trying so hard to love and to help because you don't have boundaries. It's not actually a they problem, it's a you problem. It's a us problem. So this kind of boundaryless life leads to chronic self-abandonment, which creates the dis-ease at the soul level. So, I'm going to give you a little bit of my own background and story as someone who lived without boundaries for the majority of my life up until I became really aware that living without boundaries was not serving me. I tried to avoid putting up boundaries in my life outside of like the basic ones, because it actually terrified me on a deep level and I didn't understand why. I had spent decades of my life leaking out energy, trying to be what I thought everyone else needed me to be. This pattern I discovered through a lot of very deep soul searching and investigation and unpacking, not impacting, unpacking of my own belief system that started for me as a really little girl. Because as a child, I perceived that it was my job to fix people, it was my job to make people happy. I often would morph myself into what I perceived other people thought that I should be. I did a lot of shoulding of myself. And that gave me a hit of feeling really special. It made me feel very important. And underneath that behavior was a very limiting belief that I was not inherently special. I was not inherently worthy. So, in order to receive worth, to receive validation, to receive these hits of special, I would people please. And if, if you have been or if you are a people pleaser, you know that putting up boundaries is impossible because if you put up a boundary, sometimes people aren't going to like it. So if you're addicted to people pleasing for whatever reason, there's always a payoff. So for me, again, people pleasing other people would make me feel like I was worthy, I was special. So I did that and I perpetuated that throughout my life so that I could receive that worth. Um, and over time for me, it didn't serve. It doesn't serve us to be a people pleaser. That's not how we're designed. We're not designed to please other people. We're here designed to please just one, and that's God within. But I didn't know that. I didn't understand it. And then what I could understand was on a conceptual level. I would read the books. I started in therapy in my early 20s. I read books on boundaries. I did work on putting up boundaries in my life. So I could understand them from an intellectual standpoint, but I couldn't get deeper down into why it would dysregulate me so much to put up a boundary. And, at the core of it, I really did fear that if I said no, if I set limitations in my life, if I asked for what I needed from other people, I wouldn't be loved. And each of us human beings, every single one of us has the same deep down desire and need. And that's to know that we are unconditionally loved. It is to be loved. That's how we're designed. But The thing is, we're not designed to find that outside of ourselves. We're designed to find that love, that unconditional love within us. I didn't understand that until I understood it. And that's why I can stand here in a place and I can share this with you because I've lived in the pain of living boundaryless and constantly looking outside of myself to receive love and validation and worth. So for me, this deep conditioning came during my childhood where I perceived this might not necessarily have been the truth that my parents were coming from or the people around me, but what I perceived, the stories that I wrote from different things that I picked up in my childhood, and then the conditioning of my childhood was that my seeking of approval, that the love that I desired was very conditional and I had to earn it. My nervous system became very wired based on these early beliefs in my life. And my nervous system then equated boundaries with abandonment. And that's very, very painful to experience. So when the nervous system becomes wired for a certain level of safety, and so that was part of the wiring for me of what equated safety, I did everything I could to avoid that feeling of abandonment, that feeling of reinforcing that deep, deep down belief that was in my subconscious mind. I was not aware of so much of this until I was aware. And that I was, again, abandoned, unworthy, not special. Those are very, very painful beliefs to really embody. So, what changed for me and what really changed everything for me was when I made a decision that I had to figure this out. Because living boundaryless, or I should say with leaky boundaries, because of the work that I had done throughout decades of working with therapists and coaches and reading all the books and understanding again on an intellectual level why boundaries were really important, I put up boundaries in my life. And we're going to talk about the different kinds of boundaries, external and internal boundaries. I certainly would put them up. It wasn't like I was living without absolutely any boundaries, but even when I would put them up, I would put them up in the areas where it felt easier. But if it were with somebody or something in my life that that person or that situation might challenge me, or I would perceive that it could possibly upset somebody, I would write a lot of stories in my head around this. I would become incredibly, incredibly dysregulated. And I would experience that dysregulation in my own body. My palms would sweat so badly. I mean, sweaty, sweaty, sweaty palms, racing heart. My whole gut would take quite the hit when I was in this state of dysregulation, and I'd run to the bathroom. I'd have stomach aches. I couldn't digest properly. This ended up just creating a cascade of other dis-ease in my own body, and I didn't understand why. Again, it had so much to do with living without the boundaries as being unsafe, and then putting me in a constant state of fight or flight. It was very simmering and under the surface, but that doesn't matter. It was there. And again, it was driving a lot of dis-ease, inflammation, unrest in my overall well-being. And it was about a year and a half ago, and you can go back a couple episodes and you can hear more of the story itself. But in my journey of trying to understand myself and understand where this all came from, I was led to do a guided MDMA journey. And when I did my first guided MDMA journey, inside the medicine itself, you take this medicine and it's very gentle and it's a very, very loving experience. It's not a psychedelic like a lot of the other um, um, plant medicines that are talked about now more frequently. It's an a pathogen, and what it does to the brain is the amygdala in the brain is what is very wired for safety, and it's our fear response. So it quiets the amygdala, it quiets that fear response. And for me, having the amygdala basically take a nap for 6 hours and not trip up this fear response, it was so beautiful because it allowed me to go into these deeply embedded beliefs in my subconscious that I could not access outside the medicine. I couldn't because my amygdala was so wired to sound the alarm and say, danger, don't go into that. Don't go in, because if you go in, then that's also a threat to the nervous system, because perhaps then I'm going to create change. So inside the medicine on my first MDMA journey, I really was able to unpack all of this, and I saw it so clearly. I saw how my mind, as a very little girl, erected these beliefs that I was not special, that I was unworthy, and from that developed a pattern of survival. It was my way, my mind's way of protecting me, and that's where the people pleasing came in. And it became habit. It became my default setting. And therefore, whenever I try and put up a boundary, I'd get triggered and dysregulated because a boundary was a threat to the underlying belief that I wasn't special. And there's a possibility, again, if you put up a boundary, that somebody might not like it. And then that person not liking it was going to reinforce for me that I wasn't special. And that's even more painful, to have our beliefs that are deeply, deeply embedded, again, oftentimes in the subconscious mind, to have them reinforced, to have it reflected back to us that, oh my gosh, that's actually truth. So when I did that, my first MDMA journey, God really met me there, and he whispered to me, you, Jen, do not have to earn love. You already are love. And you get to say no, Jen. You get to honor your own needs. You get to protect the sacred that is within you, that is your self, your true essence of self. That journey for me was a big turning point where I realized that boundaries were not walls. I had this perception that putting up a boundary was like putting up a wall of China, and it was very hard and oftentimes mean or cruel. And instead, I was able to see that boundaries were a bridge. They're a bridge to peace, a bridge to clarity and deep connection. Deep connection for me with myself, deep connection with God within, deep connection with other people. So, as you can imagine, from that time forward, I have been so empowered with being able to put up really healthy boundaries in my life that honor me. They honor me and they honor God within, and they actually honor other people in my life. Me putting up a boundary is telling somebody else that I am worthy of whatever that boundary is. And it models for them how that they can help me to feel and function my very best. How, by honoring the boundary that I'm putting up, that they're actually helping me to show up as my best self in this world. So let's get clear on what boundaries are and what they're not. So boundaries are not ultimatums or judgments, they're clarity. So there's two different kinds of boundaries. There are external boundaries, and external boundaries are what you say yes and no to in perhaps relationships, your time, your work, commitments. You can think about a tree. You've got the tree itself above the ground with all of the branches, and then underneath the ground, you have all the roots. So the external boundaries are the tree's branches that we see on the outside. And then we also have internal boundaries. And the internal boundaries, those would be the roots under the ground that we can't see. They're not visible to other people, but the internal boundaries for us, that's what we can see. And this is how we manage our thoughts, our emotions, and our energy. It's our self talk. It's our capacity to pause before reacting. It's our willingness to not overly identify with other people's emotions. And internal boundaries are really, really important for us to put up for ourselves. Nobody else can do that for us. And that takes a lot of clarity. It takes us really understanding ourselves and understanding our own unique needs. And our needs change. They change as we grow and evolve. They change depending on the season of life we are in. We might need more internal boundaries just depending on our current season of life. And both types of boundaries matter deeply. Most people focus on the external boundaries. That's what we automatically think of. When we think of a boundary, we think of perhaps we say no to certain people in our life who can easily overstep boundaries. And so we need to have very specific boundaries with them on how much time we are available for something, whether that's a conversation or spending actual time with someone. There could be people in our life that feel very toxic to us. So we have very specific boundaries around how we communicate with them. So those are external. And again, people tend to focus a lot on those, but our internal boundaries are what we allow ourselves to stay anchored to in love. So this can literally range from anything from the foods that we choose to eat to the habits that we have in our life, supportive habits or unsupportive habits. When we know ourselves really well, we get to know what helps us to feel and function our very best. So when I'm working with clients who come to me, depending on what they're coming here for, but everybody who comes here is coming here to feel and function their very best in one way, shape or form. And so we get underneath the symptoms that are expressing themselves, that are getting their attention, and we start to take a look, and we'll take a look at all the functional foundations, including what they're putting in their body. And they get to know what their body needs to feel and function its very best to thrive. So perhaps they learn that too much sugar, alcohol, gluten, processed foods, they don't serve their body. They make them feel like crap. So if you discover that, and you discover that through experimentation, and you have a goal that you want to feel a certain way. You want to wake up feeling really energized, clear minded, and ready for a brand new day that's very productive, and you're really present to it. And you know that, say, drinking alcohol and having like some beer and pizza for dinner is not conducive to you feeling and functioning your very best, then you're going to put up an internal boundary for yourself where you don't consume that. And it's up to you to honor that. So that is an example. It can be that literal, that internal boundary. Like, I have a boundary where I don't eat gluten. I have a boundary where I don't go on my phone and expose myself to blue light and keep my brain activated and scroll before I fall asleep, because I know that then I'm not going to get the deep restorative sleep that I desire and that I need to feel and function my very best. I have a boundary where I don't engage in negative conversation that's gossipy because number one, it doesn't serve anybody. It doesn't serve God and the greatest and highest good of anybody. And it brings down my energetic vibration. And I'm here to raise my vibration and raise the vibration of this collective world we live in. So I don't participate in gossip, right? Like it can be that, but that's something that comes inside of us. So let's now move into talking about why boundaries are actually really loving. Again, I used to perceive that boundaries were the opposite of loving. They were harsh, they were scary. I thought they were mean, and I thought that other people in my life, if I put a boundary up, would perceive me to be mean and unkind and not loving. But here's the deal, boundaries are not rejection. They're not. Boundaries are protection of what is really sacred. And what's sacred for each and every one of us is for us to discern. So, boundaries help us to clarify our values. So, the boundaries that we put up in our life help us to create space to do the things that we're called to do in this world, the things that are non negotiable in our life. I'm a mom of three, and my children are getting older now. They're all young adults. But when they were young, they were my absolute top priority. And if I didn't have boundaries that created space for me to be the best mom that I could be, fully present, happy, healthy, then I was unable to show up for that role in my life. And I had to get really clear on what I could say yes and no to internally and externally so that I could be a good mom. I didn't do it right all the time by any means. But my children absolutely were some of the most convicting people in my life for me to do this boundary work and to really also teach them how to do it, especially when I started to see my girls slip into people pleasing and living their life without boundaries. Whew, I could preach to them all day long why they needed boundaries, but if they were watching me not implement them in my own life, they weren't going to do it. Boundaries help to create safe containers for our relationships to thrive. My husband and I have done a lot of deep work in our marriage over the last 5 years. We will be married 27 years on Saturday. So when this episode is aired, we'll already have celebrated our 27th anniversary of marriage. And around year 22, we were so caught up in raising children and doing all the things, both of us working and so focused on all of life that was before us, but we weren't pouring into our marriage in the ways that we needed to. And as we started to spend more time focusing on our marriage, we realized that our marriage lacked a lot of boundaries. We didn't respect one another's need for space. But it wasn't because each of us was putting up the boundary and the other person was just completely disrespecting it. We had to learn what our needs were. And my husband, I remember when he said to me, Jen, I need more boundaries. He works from home. I work from home too. Only goes into the office 1 day a week. So he's on calls all day long in a corporate job. And I used to just walk into his office and start talking to him and assume that he could immediately switch gears and be able to converse with me in whatever topic I was bringing into his office. The kids would do the same with him too. They would just open the door and whatever was on their mind, whatever their need was, they would just go right into him. And before he became aware that he needed to put up a boundary with all of us, he would try and please us. But under the surface, he was incredibly resentful. He was frustrated. It would end up resulting in a lot of tension between the two of us. So, as he started to communicate his needs, he put up boundaries and we came up with ways that we could each honor one another and our own unique needs. So putting up boundaries in relationship actually helps them to be safer containers for the relationship itself to thrive. I put up boundaries in other relationships in my life, and some boundaries that I had to put up were around what I would and would not participate in, what I would not included, talking about other people, oversharing information. And I can say that today it helped my relationships, certainly specific ones in my life, to be able to thrive. So, boundaries also help us to model self respect and invite other people to do the same. So, when we respect ourselves, we model for other people how they can respect us. And that's a very different than just demanding respect, just saying, I demand respect. We model what respect looks like, and it starts with us respecting ourselves. So when we stand really confident and we respect ourselves, which is also a way that we're loving ourselves, then we train other people to how to be in relationship with us. When other people are crossing what feels like a boundary for us, but we haven't expressed to them what that boundary is, and then we're getting really, really resentful, that's a me problem. That's not a they problem. Most often, living without boundaries and getting really frustrated because you're feeling so overwhelmed, you feel completely drained and burnt out. That's a us problem. That is not a problem because of the job that we're in, the roles that we have in our life, the people that are in our life, because we are the ones who are responsible for putting them up. And again, I'm going to say this again, we train people to be in relationship with us. So if we're shifting, if you're listening to this and you're like, I am all game for putting up more boundaries in my life, and I'm totally understanding why I need more boundaries, just know that because you've trained certain people to be in a relationship with you, and maybe you were like me and you had no boundaries, they might not like it at first. It might be really uncomfortable for them. That's okay. That's okay, because they can be retrained to be in relationship with you. You also get to teach your nervous system through putting up healthy boundaries that you're safe, that you're held, and that you're sovereign. And so, just as it takes some time to train other people to be in relationship with us as we're changing, we also need to give ourselves some grace and space and a lot of compassion for the process of retraining our nervous system. At first, it feels really uncomfortable, and it's going to feel uncomfortable until we continue to show up differently. And again, we train the nervous system like, hey, this is actually the better way, and this is the safer way. My nervous system today, oh, it's so much more regulated. I do not get emotionally charged the way I used to when I say no, when I remind someone of a boundary that is in place. It's just what is. And it's very, very loving, just as I'm talking about here. Spiritually, boundaries say that we trust God as our source, not other people's approval. So we're trusting God to be our source of everything, our validation, our worth, unconditional love, essentially approval. So that's pretty darn big, isn't it? That message in and of itself, that we're energetically saying by our actions, is reinforcing to ourselves that God is our source of everything. And then we get to drop looking outside of ourselves. It is so freeing, my friends. The amount of energy that you regain, you start to fill your tank way back up because you're not trying to bail water all the time out of a leaky boat. That's the way I was living for so long. And it was exhausting, it was depleting, and it wasn't serving me at all. So, when you're really, really clear on what's yours and what's not yours, you open up space for deeper love, for deeper presence, and true healing. Because again, go back to that nervous system that is now being rewired because you have healthy boundaries in place internally and externally. And it's being rewired for safety and for love, right? So when it's rewired for that, you're going to hang in a parasympathetic dominant state more than in the sympathetic dominant state, which is going to invite your body to rest deeper, to heal. It will help to even regulate certain functions. Autonomic functions in your body. It's pretty darn awesome. So then when you do the gut healing protocol, right? Because there's maybe some imbalances in your gut microbiome, it works. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people over the last decade and done a lot of work on myself. And I can tell you, you can do all the things, throw all the fancy, expensive supplements at your gut. But if you are living boundaryless, you are in a state of sympathetic dominance, you are in fight or flight, and you won't heal. Maybe you can keep your head above the water a little tiny bit, but you will sink back down. So investing the time to explore where you have leaky boundaries or a lack of boundaries will help you to overall live your life so much healthier. So I want to leave you now talking about how you can do an audit to strengthen your own boundaries. So we need to get really clear on where you may need stronger boundaries or where you don't have any boundaries or where they might be leaking. So I'm going to give you some reflective prompts, and I'll also write these out and drop them in the show notes so that you can go back and perhaps journal, like spend some time with this, especially if this podcast is really resonating with you. So, the first one is to take an audit of the soul. So, soul audit. So, first question is, where in my life do I feel most resentful? Hmm. And then ask yourself, where am I saying yes when I want to say no? What emotions arise when I imagine setting a boundary? And now, step two, you've done your soul audit. Now we're going to identify the leak. So you can ask yourself, what fear is under this lack of a boundary? Is it a fear of rejection, abandonment, guilt? Get really, really clear. So you can identify the leak, but we want to understand where it's coming from. What is the old story that the boundary break is tied to? So, is there a story there? Like I shared with you that I discovered that my story came from childhood. And in childhood, I decided that I wasn't special. That came from some conditioning that I picked up on, and nobody directly told me that I wasn't special, but I wrote a story that I wasn't special. And so that story was very much part of the boundary break for me, because that story then led to the behavior of chronic people pleasing and not being able to live with boundaries. Then what you want to do, which is step three, you want to anchor in truth. So ask yourself these two questions. The first one is, what is God saying about this? So really get clear on truth. So what's God saying about you living without boundaries? Or perhaps it's, what does God say about the underlying belief that is leading to having leaky or no boundaries? So for me, my underlying belief was I'm not special. And when I really started to look for truth with a capital T, that was my little t truth. That was a truth that I made to be true for me, but it wasn't a truth that was founded on real truth. It was a construct of my mind. It was a belief system that I erected out of my own conditioning. And that's very empowering to know, by the way, because when we know that we erected it and our mind directed it, then we know we can dissolve it. We can take it down. And we want to rebuild the belief based on truth with a capital T. So I know that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, that I'm created on purpose for a purpose, for a divine purpose. So once I could counter the limiting beliefs that I had constructed throughout my life with real truth, then I that was very, very helpful for me in being able to dissolve the old beliefs. And so get clear on that for you. And then ask yourself this question: how can you come back to love, capital L, rather than fear in this moment? So asking yourself in any given moment when you start to feel hijacked and you see a need to put up a boundary, and perhaps some old story starts pulling you away from truth and saying, oh, you can't put up a boundary because they're not going to like you, you're not going to be special, da, da, da. It's your job to fix them. What will happen if you don't? Right? So, how can you get yourself back into love? How can you use that feeling of fear as a divine tap on your shoulder that invites you to drop back into love, back where the divine is inside of you, where there's unconditional love, infinite wisdom, everything that you need, safety? And then the last step is to start small. Start small. You cannot go from being boundaryless or having really leaky boundaries and being a chronic people pleaser like I once was, to having really shored up solid boundaries in every area of your life, internally and externally, overnight. It just won't happen. We want to start by practicing saying no to some things when the stakes are really low. Like, start where the stakes are low so that the nervous system doesn't get so freaked out, because the nervous system, again, is wired for safety, and part of the safety is for things to be the same. The nervous system does not like change, doesn't like change. So start small. Start in areas of your life where, again, the stakes are lower, and you practice and you get better. It's a muscle. You're also creating a new habit. So give yourself grace, practice patience and persistence in this, because over time it will get easier. Choose one internal boundary for yourself and get really good at it. So, for instance, I will not ruminate on what others think of me today. Anytime I start to think about what other people are thinking about me and I start to worry, and get all paranoid, because that's been a habit of mine, I put up a stop sign. You could put your hand up and just say, stop. We're not doing that. That's a boundary. I'm absolutely just not doing that. I'm taking a complete and utter break from ruminating on what other people think of me. And I'm just going to pattern interrupt with my visual stop sign. You can also use loving language when you're communicating boundaries, such as, I really love you and I'm not available for that right now. So you can say to the other person that you love them. You don't necessarily have to do that. When you're coming from a place of love, you can stand confident in the energy of love that's coming through your words. It doesn't always mean that the other person is going to like it, and that's okay. You're honoring yourself, but if it feels better to you to verbally say, I love you, and we don't want to say but, we want to say and I'm not available for for that right now. Really challenge yourself as you're practicing putting up boundaries to not over explain, to not give the person all the details of why you're saying no, because that is a form of people pleasing in and of itself. That's you worrying about what they're going to think of your decision and your boundary. And now you're over explaining yourself. You don't need to over explain yourself. Always do a check in. Are you doing this from a place of integrity? Are you doing this from a place of love, of self love, of respect, right? You do not need to justify your actions to other people. So, the last step is to nourish the nervous system. So, restorative practices like breath work, prayer, somatic movement, journaling are really, really nourishing to the nervous system. This is a big deal. So, if you're listening to this podcast and you are getting super clear that you've lived with really leaky boundaries up until now, and you're very inspired and motivated to start putting up boundaries, please follow the steps that I'm sharing with you here today and start small. Start to identify areas where you can work on putting up boundaries that are lower stakes. Start with an internal one at a time, just one at a time with yourself, right? So, doing these things that I'm sharing with you here today, and really, really nourish and love up your nervous system in the process. The nervous system, again, gets wired for safety and it does not like change. So the nervous system isn't going to like this at first. We are reprogramming, rewiring, and refiring the nervous system. This is the area where I find so many people get really tripped up because they'll feel all the dysregulation in the nervous system, even though they're conscious in their consciousness. They've created a shift. So their consciousness is aware that this is the most loving thing to do. They're really game to do it and they want to do it and they start to do it. But the nervous system, there's a lag time. The nervous system has to get trained into the new thing. So for me, I really, really struggled with this because I didn't fully understand what was in my subconscious mind. And that's why when I did my first, what I call a freedom journey inside the medicine, you can actually begin to rewire and refire the nervous system. So outside the medicine, the integration is a little bit easier, and it was for me, but it doesn't mean that you don't need to integrate. I absolutely have had to integrate. I'm still doing it every single day when I put up internal and external boundaries. It's helping to rewire my nervous system to see that boundaries are safe. So we can use, along with lots of restorative practices, using breath when we're really feeling dysregulated, maybe some somatic movement, dropping ourselves into prayer. We can use affirmations to help too, and you can write them out. I have affirmations. Right now, I'm looking at some affirmations I have on a post it note on my desk. We can use affirmations like, it is safe to be clear. I honor what is sacred. Boundaries are love in action. Whatever feels like it resonates with you, practice those affirmations and write them down for yourself. So, the path to surrender isn't passive, it's deeply empowered. And sometimes that empowerment begins with one of the most radical acts of self love. That's drawing a boundary and saying, I matter too. If today's episode stirred something inside of you, maybe a realization of where you've been overgiving, overdoing, or abandoning yourself, I want you to know that you don't have to walk this path alone. Whether you've been craving deep soul nourishment, whether you've been longing for nervous system healing, or curious about the powerful work of freedom journeys, I'm here to walk alongside of you. If you are ready to explore what it could look like to reclaim your energy, to restore your peace, and create boundaries that really honor your body, spirit, and your calling? Let's talk. I invite you to book a discovery call with me. The link is here in the show notes. You can go over to my website as well. And together we'll explore what kind of support best aligns with where you are and where you're being called. From personalized one on one coaching to guided journey work and beyond, I am here for you, my friend. You are worthy of sacred care. You are worthy of vibrant wellness. And you are more than worthy of boundaries that protect what's most precious. You'll find the link in the show notes, or you can head over to my website at jenniferragazzo.com and schedule a call. I would be so honored to hold space for you in your next chapter. Until next time, surrender what's not yours to carry and reclaim what was always yours to protect. If this show has blessed you in one way or another, I would really appreciate if you would rate and review, and please share it with a friend so more can get this message and really be able to vibrantly rise. Until next time. Thank you for joining me on the Daily Surrender. If today's episode spoke to you, I'd love to hear your reflections. Send me a message, share this with a friend, or leave a review. Remember, true healing and freedom come when we let go, surrender, and trust that God's way is so much better than our way. Until next time, my friends, keep surrendering, keep rising, and keep walking in peace.